Hey everyone, today's topic is suspension, specifically these bolt-on kind of sway bars and reinforcement bars. If you're looking for some tips on how to make your Mark 1 handle better or just feel tighter, this video is for you.
Who's there? Connecting rod.
That's good. Before we dig in, I want to give another thank you to Roberto. As I mentioned in that last video that we did with his car, he chipped in some money towards the channel, which allowed me to get a new microphone set up. So I'm filming on the GoPro right now, but this is what I managed to pick up with the donation he gave. I was able to get a new Rode microphone. With that, to use it on the GoPro, you need a microphone adapter, and then to make things neat and tidy without having to strap that adapter to the side of the camera, you need to get some kind of case. All this together was something I've been putting off for way too long now, and as you saw in that last video, we ran into some audio issues. These GoPros are awesome. In environments like this with little to no background noise, the microphones work great. They do have 2 or 3 different microphones, and it switches between them depending on how much background noise there is. At certain speeds, the background noise was loud enough to cause issues and kind of drown us out. So that should no longer be an issue with this new setup. So thanks again, Roberto. Got Leah's Beetle moving under its own power again. We got some parts we got to throw on that. We'll probably do a video of that next. For those of you who are hoping to see Mark 1 stuff and don't really care for the air-cooled, sorry, but you know, with the coronavirus and everything going on, it's kind of hard to go film the cars that I want to film. And I figured it's a great opportunity to do a video showcase on Leah and her Beetle and what her history is and what she went through to get that car, which is a pretty cool story in itself. So for those who do care to see it, stay tuned. That should be coming up. We'll probably do that next week. I'm trying to clean up this disaster now that it's out of the garage, and came across these suspension parts. Figured, hey, let's do a video talking about the different things you could bolt on and the benefits to them. Any which one of these by themselves will help, some more than others. You know, for example, we've got the upper strut bar here, and this kind of ties the top of the strut towers together. By itself, maybe not a huge difference. You might not be able to notice it at all, but every little bit helps. You know, if you do all of these things combined amongst a few other things that we're going to talk about, all those things together will make for a really nice, fun handling car. So in my opinion, it's not really worth it to do just one of these smaller items unless you're going to do a couple others. So first and foremost, we have the strut bars. This one in particular is for the front. I don't know where the one I have is that's for the rear, but it's the same idea, just looks a little different. The one I have is just a simple bar with two like rings on each end that go around the top of the rear strut towers and help tie that in, keep them from flexing in towards each other. But as you can see here, this is what it looks like on the car. Like I said, it bolts right to the top of the strut towers and ties them in, keeps them from flexing in towards each other. This one I think is even a Mark II or some. This one didn't really fit, so I kind of had to make it work, but whatever. I like it. It's tucked away up there nice, whereas that other one I have kind of sits further out into the bay. Now these by themselves, do they make a huge difference? I don't think so. By themselves, I definitely think you'll notice a difference. But all of these things I strongly suggest using together, because just like weight reduction, ounces make pounds. So, you know, you do the strut bars with an X brace and sway bars, you do all that stuff together, it's going to make a huge difference and make for a very nice tight feeling Mark 1, because in stock form, these cars do feel very sloppy. There's a lot of body roll. The GTIs are a bit tighter because they come with sway bars stock, but we'll get into that a little bit. If there's any item in particular that I like the most, it's a toss-up between the X brace and a rear sway bar, but that's kind of particular to the pickup. The pickups don't come with any kind of sway bars at all. There's an aftermarket company called addco that made one for the rear, and that really tightened up the whole back end of the truck. It's a toss-up between the X-brace and a rear sway bar for the pickup. If you're in a hatchback that doesn't have that leaf spring set up in the rear, so the rear sway bar isn't as important, I would say between the X-brace and the front sway bar, those are going to give you the biggest benefit and the biggest difference in feel. Front strut bars, definitely worth it. They look cool if that's your thing, if you're really just going for the looks. Past the strut bars, you want to look into the X-brace or the Scirocco K-bar. Now these kind of have the same purpose. Main differences are the size and kind of mounting points. So the X-brace, obviously being bigger, is going to give you a bit more rigidity. The downside to this though is, as you can see, it kind of hangs down low from where it mounts. You know, mounting points are up here, and as you can see where that X meets in the middle, kind of hangs pretty low. And I'll show you once we get under the sport truck, that becomes the lowest point of your car. For those of you who are lowered more than, you know, say an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, you're going to want to look into the Scirocco K-bar, because this doesn't stick down as low, and does provide similar benefits. You know, kind of does the same thing as the X-brace, just doesn't do it as well. Like I said, we're gonna go under the sport truck in a little bit, and I'll kind of show you exactly how this stuff mounts up, so you get an idea of what it ties together. Next up, we've got the sway bars. This is a stock sway bar off of GTI. I believe the convertibles also came with front or the rear sway bars, or both, I'm not positive, but the GTIs from the factory came with front and rear sway bars. I don't have a stock rear sway bar sitting around. There is one on the car, but we're not going to jack up that car right now. But it's the same idea, looks similar. It's a bar that goes out and ties out towards the wheels and bolts to the car itself, or the axle, or the rear beam in this case. And it just kind of ties everything together, ties the wheels together, makes them act more as one, and limits independent travel to an extent. Not the best way to describe it. If you want to know more about sway bars, go on Google, go on YouTube. There's plenty of other videos explaining the exact science behind sway bars. In some cases, you might not want a sway bar at all. Again, this is something you're going to want to look into and read up on your own, but you'll see some track guys don't run a front sway bar or don't run a rear sway bar, and that is because they want the car to handle a certain way, or when they put a sway bar on, it'll negatively affect the handling for the type of racing or driving that they're doing. So look a bit more into this. Personally, on the pickup, I have both front and rear sway bars, and the front sway bar is aftermarket on the sport truck. It's a new Speed brand. It's actually thicker, so it's a larger diameter bar, which will make it stiffer. And again, if you look into the science behind sway bars, you'll see that there's different sizes. It goes by millimeter. I don't know what the stock one is. I'm not too positive on the sizes. I just know that the aftermarket sway bars tend to be bigger diameter than what you get from the factory. Same thing applies to the rear sway bar. So the way that this all goes together, on the control arm here, you'll see these two holes. If you have an early car with factory control arms, you won't have these two holes. You can always drill them in, but after a certain year, all these aftermarket companies just started adding these holes to kind of cover every application, whether or not you have a sway bar. But as you see here on the sway bar itself, you've got these little rubber bushings, and I don't have the brackets here, but it's a strap that bolts down through these two holes, and then towards the middle of the sway bar here, you've got same thing, you know, a big strap bracket that straddles around the bushing, that rear bushing on the control arm. And this all ties it all together. With this control arm traveling up and down, you get an idea of how these sway bars work and exactly what they do. They basically cut down body roll. And again, I touched briefly on how some people don't like running them. Say that if you go too stiff or too soft, you will cause too much understeer or too much oversteer. I have no problems with either. Once I put both of those sway bars and all these other handling components on the truck, I could get the rear to swing out when I want it to, and makes for a great handling truck. So you might have to play around with stuff. You might end up buying a sway bar. You might put it on and see that you don't like the way it acts and take it off, or go with a bigger one. You know, there's a lot of variables to this. What motor you're running, what tires, wheels, all that stuff, ride height, coilovers. So you'll have to play around with all this. This is not an exact science. Well, it is an exact science, but every setup's going to be a little different. While we're here looking at the factory sway bar, I'll point out these rubber bushings. These are the stock ones. They're like a soft rubber. I can push and move it with my fingers. It's a flexible, soft rubber. Same thing for these ones here. You know, they deform, they move. On the inside of the control arm, both front and back, same thing. We've got these soft rubber bushings that flex and give a bit. If you don't want to go too crazy and retain some comfort for daily driving use, I don't think you really need to change these out. You know, you might not want to change them out, but if performance is the main goal, you can swap these out for a harder polyurethane bushing, which I'll show you underneath the truck when we get under there, because I have both sway bar and control arm upgraded bushings. Control arms. There's a few things you could do, like we already spoke about. These rubber bushings can be changed out for a stiffer polyurethane upgrade, but you can also upgrade the whole control arm itself to a tubular control arm. Now these are very aggressive, and I say this because most of them seem to use a Heim joint here in place of the rubber bushings, and me personally, I would not feel safe using those on the street. Not for a safety aspect, but in terms of the Heim joint itself not being as durable to road dirt and potholes and bumps and whatnot. I would rather use the stock bushing style on the street. If it were a track car, if you're building a track car, these tubular control arms with the Heim joints are definitely a great way to go. I know one or two people who have ran the Heim joints on the street with no issues, but me personally, I drive my Mark 1s on the street too much to feel comfortable using those. And I'll overlay a picture here right now of what those tubular control arms look like. I know Fabless Manufacturing, somebody pointed out to me today, offers a tubular control arm that uses this stock bushing style. So there are options out there. Me personally, I'm sticking with stock control arms because there is a way to stiffen these up. As you can see, the stock control arms are basically two sheets of metal stamped and welded together, just in the main ends. I don't even know if it's welded down here, because you do have these, you do have the 3 bolts for the ball joint holding that together. But it's just not a super rigid design. Aside from the bushings, one thing you could do to stiffen these up is weld the seam shut. I've seen a few people do little sections, you know, kind of stitch welding this together. Whereas other people will weld the whole thing shut all the way around. Now, some people will argue that the downside to welding the seam on the factory control arms is that you are kind of getting rid of a crumple zone. In the event of an accident, you know, hitting a curb or hitting another car, these will tend to crumple first and absorb the damage rather than sending it and transferring it through the body of the car. Whether or not it was designed that way from the factory, it has happened before. Personally, if you're going to get into that bad of an accident, are the control arms really going to save that much? I don't know. You know, it's debatable. I don't plan on hitting any curbs anytime soon, but you never know. You know, if you're really concerned about that, then don't bother welding it. All these things by themselves and the bushings are plenty to stiffen up these cars. This is just one thing that's worth talking about while we're here. Me personally, I weld them up. I actually don't have the ones on the sport truck welded up for whatever reason. I just haven't gotten around to it. But I do have brand new control arms that I'm going to weld for the GTI. I don't know where they are. They're buried somewhere in the shed. Otherwise, I would just go ahead and weld them up and show you guys firsthand what it's like. But it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You just weld the seam shut on all sides, whether you stitch weld it, spot weld it, or weld it entirely shut. Now, I already mentioned I don't have the rear strut bar out to show you. I don't know where it is. There's another bar back in the trunk area for the hatches that I think New Speed made one. It's like a K brace or an X brace, I forget, but I'll overlay a picture here if I could find it. But it basically is an X brace that goes and ties together the rear strut towers even more, which is useful for you hatchback people. The other bar I don't have here right now, which isn't really crucial for you people running 4 cylinders. It's more so for you VR6 people. There is a There is a bar that a few companies make that tie together the front here. It kind of goes at the bottom of the rad support there. I don't have one. I don't have the need for one, so I don't really have it here to show you. I'll try and include a picture of that too. It's kind of hard to see. It's not as pronounced with this oil pan in the way. This does sit lower than the stock oil pan, but you can kind of see how that X-brace is now the lowest point of the truck. So that's why if you're super low, the X-brace isn't really an option for you, and why you might want to consider using the Scirocco K-bar instead. Now, the one downside to the Scirocco K-bar is you do need to drill 2 holes. So the X-brace, how that bolts in is using the front control arm bolt. While we're here talking about that, you can see the red polyurethane bushing that I was talking about, and then same thing on the back of the control arm. Good upgrades, cheap. You can even buy new control arms with them already mounted in, with them already installed to the control arm. Makes your life a little easier because changing these out isn't exactly the most fun. So back to the X-brace. The rear of the X-brace bolts into that same strap that the swaybar bolts into. Kind of a little confusing, sorry if it's hard to keep up, but it's really not too bad once you get under here and start bolting stuff up. It only goes on one way. Now the swaybar again uses that different style strap bracket for the control arm and holds the middle of the swaybar on both sides. The swaybar comes up over the top of the control arm and bolts into the control arm like so. So that's the new speed swaybar. Again, it's thicker than the stock one. Totally transformed the truck. Probably, you know, I think I say this about all the suspension parts, but definitely one of my favorite things I've ever done to the truck. The X-brace, the front and rear sway bars, total game changers. Now let's go on to the back of the truck and show you this aftermarket sway bar. Back here, this is an aftermarket sway bar. Last I checked, they're no longer available. A group of guys on Burnwell, the Mark 1s, managed to convince the company to make another batch. So I know another 10 were made after they discontinued them. But good luck finding one. I'll leave the name and a link of where to get it, or where you used to be able to get it. As you can see, it straps to the rear beam and then bolts up into the bottom of the truck there. Really transformed the truck. You can see here that the stock suspension on the Rabbit pickup trucks don't really have any kind of side-to-side reinforcement or stabilization bars, none of that stuff. So this rear sway bar really ties together the rear end. Sorry for the noisy heater. It's a bit cold out. I know I sound like a broken record saying, oh, this is the best thing you can do, but you know, all these suspension bits are really some of the best things you can do to these cars. That rear sway bar for the pickup, definitely something to get your hands on if you can, and you don't like the way that the truck feels in stock form. It's one of the only things you could do to kind of tighten up the back of the truck. One of the things you'll notice if you own one of these trucks and drive them over bumps, especially through turns, the back of the truck will kind of hover around and do a little bit of a wiggle action, and that sway bar is one of the only things you can do to tighten it up, short of doing a 4-link setup, and that's a whole different can of worms. But for the stock leaf spring setup, get your hands on one of those sway bars if you can. It'll totally transform it. Even if you're not really shooting for handling, or making it a race car, it will make the car more enjoyable and less tin can feeling. It'll make it stick to the road better and just give you a more comfortable drive, in my opinion, without really any negative side effects. Speaking of side effects, the downside to putting all this stuff on is you will make the car stiffer, obviously. But the downside to that is you're going to feel the bumps in the road, the imperfections more. Things will vibrate, you'll hear more noises. But personally, that's fine. That's the trade-off you're giving. These aren't exactly Cadillacs in the first place. The big thing, as I mentioned before though, if you leave the stock rubber bushings in, you're not going to get too harsh of a ride. So you could kind of mix and match and get the ideal setup. If you're not sure about doing everything, leave the stock bushings in for starters, put all this stuff on and see how it feels. You can always take it back off and change out the bushings after. So that should kind of cover everything you need to know in terms of handling upgrades, at least without getting into coilovers and springs. There's plenty we could talk about there, but it's pretty straightforward. You know, maybe one day we'll do a video on those, but in short, the less you spend, the less you're going to get. Racelands being some of the cheapest coilovers. Yes, they are stiffer. They will bring the car lower to the ground, get your center of gravity lower. And yes, at the end of the day, will improve your handling. But they are bouncy, which gives you a poor ride quality, but also on some roads will negatively affect your handling. Now, the difference between the sport truck and the beater car are astronomical. In the shower this morning, I was thinking, hey, maybe I should get some way to read the G-forces and go do some benchmark testing, maybe show you guys what the sport truck can do versus the beater car. I don't know, just an idea. I gotta look into that more. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic. You know, comment below, let me know what stuff you have on your car, what stuff you would like to put on, what your experiences are, what I might have missed, what I might be wrong about, whatever. Comment below, let me know what you guys think, what you want to see next. The other day I was looking at the numbers for the channel, and 83% of you people watching aren't subscribed. So I don't know why that is, but we're 40 subscribers away from 1,000. It'd be cool if some of you people would subscribe. If you're not already for whatever reason, whatever, you know, I'm never going to sit here begging people to subscribe. But we are about to monetize. It won't be much money, but it'll be a few bucks. It'll help. We're right there. We're so close. So this is probably one of the only times you're gonna hear me say, like, go hit that button. It's like right there. It's right there. Hit the button. Just subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. It's literally free. Free 99. And I don't care if you never watch a video again. Just hit subscribe. I think you can even hide the videos after you subscribe. But yeah. I'm going to get back to organizing and cleaning the garage. I think we're going to work on her Beetle tonight. And that's that. Stay safe, people.